So in this video I'm under the Dacia Sandero and hopefully going to mend this sump, though it looks like it's already leaking. Might have to order a new one as well. See how we go. So the first task is to jack the Dacia up and make it safe. So I'm going to use two jacks, one on each side. So I'm unsure if the Dacia actually has a central front jacking point. So just to be on the safe side, we'll go for each of the seals and gradually lift it up bit by bit, like so. Okay, and then we pop a couple of wheel chocks behind there, just to try and prevent the car from falling down on us. And we'll also put some axle stands under this, because we're obviously going under the car, and you should never rely on just a jack. So the car should be pretty safe now. I'm actually also going to pop a couple of bottle jacks under there as well. Call me paranoid. So I'm just going to make things a little bit more comfortable with these mats, which are quite cheap. You can get these for, I think it's about 6 mats for £15, and it makes one big difference to how comfortable it is to roll around on the tarmac. So the first job here is going to be to remove the undertray. So here's a quick photo showing the 8 bolts that need to be removed to drop the undertray. So you have got a choice here. You can use a 10mm socket or a Torx 30. So I'm going to start off with a 10mm socket, just for the purposes of showing. Now this has actually got a couple of bolts missing at the front. I think they've sort of rusted away. I'll probably cable tie them when I finish. So that's the Torx 30. I'm just showing that now, so you can see that you can use a Torx 30 as well. So at least the tray is actually supported on each side by like a plastic bracket. So now all the bolts are actually out, well, apart from this one, and at least the tray doesn't fall on your head. So you just push it backwards like so and pull it away from the car. So there's our very rusty sump. That's the other thing that's useful with these mats, is you can actually slide around on them. So I think we best drain the engine oil now. So normally I'd use one of those black oil catch pans, but since the oil is going to go straight back in the car, I'm going to try and keep it clean. So I'm going to use one of these other type of containers. So to remove the sump, it's an 8mm square drive, and that shouldn't be too tight. I'm just going to pop a funnel on this, and the oil's cold anyway, so it's not going to be a problem for this type of container. If I'm careful, I should better just get it to go straight down the funnel and into the sort of like a watering can. Quite useful containers, those. Okay, so that's now out. We can pop the sump plug back in just to prevent any dripping. So we will have to remember to tighten that up before we actually put the oil back into the car once we've done the job. Okay, so now to remove the plastic flywheel cover. So here's a picture of that plastic cover that needs to be removed, and here's another angle. Now one thing when you spin around on these mats is you will get an electric shock. like so, and it hurts. So using a 13mm spanner, we just need to remove this single bolt that's keeping this cover in place. It covers the flywheel, and there's like a couple of plastic dowels on this piece that just push in to the gearbox housing or the flywheel housing. So that's that out of the way. So we can now go on to removing the 17 sump bolts. So here's a photo showing those 17 sump bolts, or most of those bolts, and here's a close-up of all that rust. Not good. So using an E8 Torx or star driver, we can just simply spin all these fasteners out. Now the sump is quite a soft metal, so when it comes to removing it you have got to be a little bit gentle. So I won't show all of these fasteners coming out, but I was just showing here that a flexible adapter can make getting those out a little bit easier. Now it might be worth me actually mentioning that to buy a new sump is actually a very reasonable £30. Now I'm actually going to try and grit blast this and weld it, just to make life a little bit more challenging, but my advice would be to just buy a new sump for £30. Okay, so I'm going to put a cover down now to collect any drops of oil. So I've got a couple of pry bars there ready, so hopefully I can pull this off. Right, so on to removing the sump. So it is actually stuck on, so it will take a little bit of work. Obviously I didn't want to hammer where it had rusted too much in case it completely caved in. So this can be useful. But like I say, if you put too much pressure on you will bend the flange of this sump. So you do need to be a little bit careful and make sure you've actually removed all of the bolts. It's quite easy just to forget one, and that's obviously going to make removing it a lot harder. So I think, there we go, we've started to get some movement. So once you've got some movement, you're on your way. So use a little bit of leverage here, pop that pry bar in and then push it back the other way, and that will lever the other side off. It wasn't going to come off on this side. There we are. Hear it click away there. So our rusty sump is now free. Now you do need to rotate the sump. I thought it would just drop down, but it doesn't. You've got the oil pickup, so you've got to sort of work it around that oil pickup, which you can now see. So it sort of goes in, because you've obviously got some baffles in there to stop the oil sloshing around if you go around a corner. Okay, so I think what we need to do now is to start cleaning this. So it's quite a rigid piece. It does seem a shame that the paint wasn't strong enough to actually last a few winters, because this is only on a 2014 car. So I would have hoped it would have lasted a little bit longer than what it has. And that's the only reason I think that was putting me off ordering another one, because I thought, well, they only may last 5 years, so almost like nothing to lose in trying to mend it, apart from a lot of time. So I started here with some diesel, just to try and get the bulk of the oil out of it. But diesel does leave an oily residue, so you're going to have to go over it with other things like meths. which is what I did. I also used some gunk as well. I did various things to try and make sure it was completely clean. Because of grit blasting it, I didn't want grit sticking to any residual oil inside the sump. It could be quite disastrous. So I'm actually going to clean this a little bit more again just before I put it into the grit blasting cabinet, which is what we're going to do now. So into the blasting cabinet the clean sump now goes. So we've got some aluminium oxide abrasive. So this is an 80 grit, and we'll pop that into the pressure blaster. I'm going to use a pressure blaster for this. I could use a siphon fed one, but this is a little bit quicker. And obviously when I saw that dust coming up, I started to get a little bit nervous about having cameras near it. So unfortunately I wasn't going to film any of this. I'm just going to film the old sump going in like so, and with the magic of photography, there it is, it's all done just like that. Okay, so we can see how bad the rust actually was. It didn't actually blow a hole through, which was quite useful. I did wonder if the grit would actually go completely through, but as you can see it's probably half the thickness of what the metal originally was, so it's going to be quite tricky to try and weld that. So I think we're almost ready to start welding by the look of it. So now for the very tricky part of welding almost non-existent metal. So here we go. Unfortunately I did lose the microphone at this point, but the idea was to do short bursts of the MIG, allowing the metal to cool down slightly to try and avoid burning a hole all the way through. But sadly that was going to become inevitable. So I'm going to put the camera at a different angle now, and so you can see the principle that I was thinking of, which is lots of short bursts. So hopefully I didn't overheat the metal too much. Gives it a little bit of time to cool down between the next shot. Now as you will see, it did burn through a few times, so now we've got a nice hole there. So we've got to somehow try and mend that hole, which is going to be even trickier. But we appeared to get there in the end. The short bursts does seem to work, but I had a few blow-throughs on this, and this is why I'd say in hindsight it's probably a lot easier just to buy a new sump for £30, because this is a lot of work. I think this sump had basically gone past the point of no return. I mean, that's quite a big hole there to try and fix and make leak proof. We got there in the end, so give that a quick brush over. When you realise there's quite a bit of this to do on the rest of the sump, it's definitely not worth the labour, I don't think. So then I actually went over it with a bit of car filler just to smooth things down, and obviously smooth the welding down as well. So there was quite a few hours of work involved in this. Right then, so now to remove all the old gasket sealant and degrease with methylated spirits. So for this I used a wire brush on a die grinder. As you can see, the DeWalt was there because I was using a flap disc to grind the welding down and get it nice and smooth for the filler. Whoa! Always be careful when you put a running power tool on a carpet. So you've got to remember also to do under the car. And it was a bit awkward down one side, so I had to use like a narrow wire brush just to make sure I got all that old sealant off from the factory. And finally, we can now start painting the sump. So that's all looking quite good now. I'm quite pleased with that. Cosmetically it also looks okay. So just give it a quick clean with some methylated spirits, not forgetting to allow it to dry. And I still think I should have cleaned this a little bit more, because I still got some pinpricks appearing whilst I was painting it. So there was obviously still some foreign matter on this, and the paint was not happy with it. But once the paint had hit it, it was a bit late to try and go back on it. So I should make sure that's really clean and there's no oil residue left on that. So I'm going to use an engine enamel and make sure you stir it properly. They do say give it a good stir, not just a shake. And I would have liked to have sprayed this, to be honest. But using a paintbrush will give me a thicker coating. But it never looks quite so professional when you use a paintbrush. But I suppose it's there to be of function. So as long as it keeps the salty road water away from the sump, then it's done its job. So this paint actually says you can add another coat as long as it's within half an hour of the previous coat. So I've actually given it 3 coats, which should see it through. So now to pre-clean the engine block and try a dummy run on the refitting, as you don't want to catch the sump and RTV on anything while refitting it. So I think it does make sense to actually do a trial run with the sump before you actually put the RTV on, because you don't want to make a mistake once you've actually got the sealant on it, because you do want to just get it on there without dinging it at all. So because the car was outside overnight, I didn't want any dust blowing onto the crank, especially when it's oily, so I did cover it to give it some protection. So I just noticed the dipstick was still popping down there, so best get that out. We don't want to be trying to work our way around the dipstick as well as the oil's takeoff pipe. So I'm going to clean the bottom of the engine again, because the oil was actually dripping down onto it while it was sat there. And like I say, you definitely don't want any oil on the surfaces, because that will stop the RTV sticking to it and could give you a leak. Now I'm also wiping the rest of the crank as well, because there's drops of oil which I didn't want dripping on anything again. So I'm just going to get my tools ready now. I've got all the screws to hand. So this is my little dummy run, just to make certain how this will go up once that sealant's on it, because it's not a case of just pushing it straight on. Because you've got the oil pickup tube there, which is plastic, you've got to get it to go through the hole and then turn the sump. So it didn't work that time. Try again, push it in, turn it, and then we're basically in position. So as long as you remember that once you've actually put the sealant on, hopefully you'll get it up there without the sealant coming into contact with anything and possibly wiping itself away from the flange, which you definitely don't want to do. Right, so I think I've got that into my head now. as to how that goes on. So I can now go back and put the RTV sealant on after giving it another clean with some methylated spirits, just in case it got contaminated then while I was doing my dummy run. Like I say, it really does need to be scrupulously clean without any traces of oil. And then you need to leave that to dry for a bit, give that 10 minutes to evaporate, and then we can actually start putting the sealant on. So I'm doing this according to the Dacia or Renault instructions, which is to put a bead along the centre and actually around each hole. So I'm just going to go around the inside first, like so, and then I'm going to go back afterwards and put a bit of sealant on the outside of the holes as per Renault's instructions. So I've got plenty of sealant on there. That should seal it, I would hope. And the last one. Right, so now let's get it onto the bottom of the engine without knocking it on anything. So remember which way it was. So straight up. Get the pickup tube inside the hole. Make sure you don't touch anything. It's not quite in there yet. Nope, still not there. Now it's in. Now you can actually twist it and it will sit there without touching anything, which is quite useful. Gives you a little bit of a chance to get your E8 star driver ready. Right, so now we've made contact. We don't want to move it now. So get 2 screws in straight away to keep things in position. Because again, you don't want to be moving it around once it's up there. Okay, so that will hold it now. So what we now need to look at is the tightening sequence. And here's a photo showing that sequence, which you do need to follow. So this is the first tightening, which is going to be 8 Newton meters. The rain is now coming. So we go around doing the sequence at 8 Newton meters. So those ones there under the cross member are a little bit trickier to get to, but they're not too bad. We've got our click there, and then once we've done that, we need to increase the torque to 10 Newton meters, and then go around and do it again, like so. I'm trying to make sure it's not as easy as you think to actually look at the diagram and identify which one you're actually tightening. But they're all done now, so we can put the plastic flywheel cover on, push it on there with the 2 dowels, put our bolt back in. Thankfully I'm not getting electric shocks at the moment, probably because it's raining so much. So that was a 13mm socket to pop that back in, and then we need to tighten the sump plug to 20 Newton meters. Before I forget to do that, that's using an 8mm square drive. That's clicked. That would be a rather silly oversight to forget to tighten that. We've definitely got the rain on this day, but thankfully the bit of tarpaulin is keeping me mostly dry. So now we can just replace the under tray, and that is a 10mm socket or Torx 30 driver. So at least while we're doing all this, the RTV should be going off on its own now. So I will give it plenty of time, give it a few hours before I actually put the oil back in. I do want that to set on its own accord. So we pop those, what would be 8 bolts back in, obviously 6 on this case. I'm going to use some cable ties at the front. We can get the dipstick back in. We definitely have got some rain. Okay, so we can take all the mats away. Basically the job is done. And we can lower the car back down. It does seem funny that whenever you work on a car outside your garage, it always rains. It sort of never fails to rain. So we're obviously going to get a bit wet now. Just taking the car off those axle stands. And then we can drop it down. Again, I do it bit by bit so I don't put too much strain on the car. A little bit at a time, just bring her back down. Like so. Right, handbrake's on. So I can remove the chocks. Worth checking. I've sort of removed the chocks before now and the car's actually started moving. Okay, so our final job is to put the oil back in. So back into the rain again. You do need to use a funnel on the Renault D4F engine, and you do need to pour it quite slowly. Otherwise it tends to burp back up into that sort of area around the filler neck. Can be a bit of a messy job. Right, so all the oil back in. So hopefully that's a good job done. Get that cap back on there. I'm going to check the oil, I don't know why. The oil should definitely still be there. There we go, it's in there. Okay, job's finished. So here's some reference photographs. So in this photo you can see the under tray before it's removed, and then looking further back down the car we can clearly see the exhaust system and one of the oxygen sensors. And then looking straight up to the engine we can see the gearbox on the right and obviously our rusty sump there with the alternator. And here's that plastic flywheel cover plate and a couple of photos showing that extremely rusty and leaking sump. So here's the oil pickup tube and you can see the orange dipstick in the background. And there's the crankshaft now in focus. Another shot of the oil pickup tube and the orange dipstick, and also one fairly rusty flywheel. You can see where the pinion of the starter motor hits the flywheel as well. And here you can clearly see where the pinion from the starter motor has kept those teeth clean. And then the rest of the photos are basically on the sump. So there we can see it all rusty. And that was the part that was leaking. And inside the sump pan, and there you can actually see the back of the drain plug. So this is the sump now all being grip blasted, showing the damage from the rust. So you've been watching the oil sump repair on a Dacia Sandero. And thank you for watching, and I hope this video helps you repair or replace your oil sump on your Dacia. This video was filmed and edited by me, Mark Savage, in July 2021. And I can be found on Instagram and Facebook under Coats and Gators.